Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Protecting Your Mental Health During the Pandemic and Holidays. So, I am Pam Williamson, the Assistant Director for the Southeast ADA Center. And we are a project of the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. We have over 500 people registered for this webinar, and currently we have over 150 people online, and I do anticipate we may have a few more join us before we get into a deep dive here. In the spring of 2020, the Southeast ADA Center hosted an ADA Live podcast with 3 parts on mental health issues during the pandemic. Today, we are pleased to host this free webinar to follow up on these important issues with a panel discussion and a question and answer dialogue. In today's webinar, we have a panel of 3 mental health professionals who will discuss how a socially distant holiday season and colder weather may affect our mental health. The panel will also share strategies that we can use to improve our mental health and cope during these difficult times. Now, at this time, I would like to introduce our panel of 3 guests. We are on video, and so hopefully for those that prefer video, you can see us. Debbie Plotnick is the Vice President for Mental Health and Systems Advocacy at Mental Health America. Dr. Doreen Marshall is the Vice President of Mission Engagement at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And Andy Sparrow is a clinical social worker and faculty at the University of Kentucky's College of Social Work. So, ladies, I welcome you today, and I'm really glad you're with us. Now, if you'd like to learn more about these ladies, you can see their bios at adacsoutheast.org/webinars/mental-health-and-COVID-19.php. Now, as we get ready to start today, so we're going to look at many issues, and our lives have been changed by COVID-19. There's no doubt about it. And so many people have lost their jobs and remain jobless. Many people are struggling to afford their housing and are experiencing food insecurity. Schools and colleges are struggling with how to return to class, and some are even ending the semester early and going back into virtual learning much earlier than planned. The uncertainty of what is safe, what's not, and when it will end has just added an unprecedented stress for many of us. And for many of us, myself included, this is a very personal issue because we already have and struggle with issues related to depression, anxiety, and myself as a person with a psychiatric disability. This is real life for me on a daily basis. So I look at this as a way for us to come together and talk about these issues. So Debbie, Andy, and Doreen, we welcome you, and we're going to get started with our questions for the day. So we will ask you to jump in and share your knowledge with our group. So first of all, as we mentioned, this year's been a challenge. I mean, the pandemic, the job loss, the election, and so many more things. And so these issues have resulted in a greater anxiety for many people. Now, in your respective organizations, what types of mental health issues have people been experiencing? Debbie, how about start for us?
Thank you, Pam. It's my pleasure to be joining you today. I appreciate the invitation. And at Mental Health America, we have been seeing anxiety from many different perspectives. Of course, it's anxiety is showing up amongst our staff members, but we also have something very unique. We have real-time data about how people are feeling when they come to our screening site, mhanational.org/screening, and you can take a screening right then and there, taking that checkup, same validated tools that you would use in the doctor's office. And we opened without fanfare 6 years ago, our screening site, and up until this year, we had 5 million screens. Now, this year alone, since the pandemic, we have had an additional 1.5 5 million people come to our screening site. They are mostly taking the screens for anxiety and depression, as we might expect. Most folks who are coming are, in fact, screening in the moderate to severe, more in the severe range than we've ever seen before. And our demographics are pretty much holding steady, that we know we have lots and lots of young people coming. 2/3 of the people who come to our site are under 24, and 1/3 of them are even 11 to 17. So we know this is having a huge effect, especially on young people, but really on everyone. And for folks who have psychiatric disabilities, we're seeing an increase in people who are taking screens for psychosis, which of course is not an illness, but a symptom. And folks are taking that screening in greater numbers as well. And again, screening in the more severe range than we had previously seen. So we're seeing that. Our staff is also, of course, like every other organization, is experiencing anxiety. We're lucky enough that we are working and we're able to serve people, and we're able to have this real-time knowledge that we have, as well as many of our other, as all of our other programs. And because there's an increased interest in mental health and in suicide, we are seeing added stressors upon our staff in terms of how busy we are. None of us are complaining about it, but it's one of those things that is showing up because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I would just chime in and let me add that I'm thrilled to be here on behalf of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Similar to what Debbie said, our audience is really communities. And so what we've heard is very similar to what Debbie shared, in that people came into the pandemic already addressing their mental health, and the changes that people have had to adapt to in a really short period of time have been some additional stressors. While we don't know what the impact on the suicide rate will be, one of the things we've been trying to do organizationally is get lots of messaging out for folks to take a proactive stance on taking care of their mental health. So whether you have never experienced any mental health concerns, or whether you're someone who has been living with a mental health condition, there are really some things you can do right now and during this pandemic to shore up your mental health. And so, similar to what Debbie said, we've seen folks with a lot of concern about anxiety. Certainly among our staff, our work hasn't stopped. In fact, I'd say we're as busy as ever. And I think that's because there are lots of folks that want to know how to look out for one another and what can they do during this time where we're physically distancing but wanting to still stay connected.
Andy, I'm going to jump in because I've got to ask you a question. As a clinician, and seeing your nods with Debbie and Doreen talking, it's obvious that this is affecting clinicians and other service providers just as much as the people who may need assistance. So what are you seeing in that area?
Oh, goodness. I work with a variety of populations, from teenagers to adults who have kids and they're trying to learn how to work from home and take care of their kids with the Zoom, the school-based Zoom sessions. And then I also work with individuals of a adult and elderly adult population who are dealing with complex and chronic medical problems and really struggling with the decrease in social interaction with other people. And so across the board, what I have noticed as a clinician is even people who had this capacity to cope with just life stressors, they're stressed out to the max. They're realizing, I really don't know how to deal with this uncertainty. I don't know why I'm having struggles with finding employment or being able to pay my bills, and how do I juggle the parent responsibilities and having to be teacher to my kid, and the challenge relationships that is happening with them. I have parents that tell me, like, I think my kid hates me because they feel like I'm always on top of them, trying to stay focusing on the attention on the website with their classes. And then I have older adults who really just need someone to listen and be there for them. And so we're having to find different ways to connect through telephone or telehealth and help them adapt to the technologies that they're not as used to. And then I also have a lot of resilient people. And I think the ones that struggle with the complex and chronic problems, whether it be medical or mental health, like I've got a few people that they have some really neat things that they have found that work for their life, that are able to identify components that are resilient in their lives. And that gives me hope as a clinician that I can also spread on to other people who are struggling. And so it's just evolving problem, but it's a manageable problem. And I want people to recognize that there is hope, that uncertainty is scary, but there is hope, and we're here. We're here for you. And even as a teacher at UK, I see the students struggling with managing online classes and still trying to know how to navigate through this time of uncertainty. And a lot of our students at UK have had an increase of anxiety and depression problems, and people who are just reconsidering completion of their program or needing to take a semester off or those kind of things. And so just it's pervasive in the services that I provide.
Well, Andy, and Debbie and Doreen, I appreciate the information that you've shared, because I think we're all feeling a lot of what you're talking about. But Andy, what just resonated with me here as you were talking is the word hope and resilience. And I'm hoping that today, as we continue through our questions, we can share that with the people that are online with us and those who may be listening later. So let's go into our next question. So, the holidays can often be stressful, even in the best of times. I mean, we love our families, but, the old saying of after 3 days, fish and company both stink, And, I think sometimes that we value those times with our family so much. But this year, because of social distancing, potential reduced incomes, we're really anticipating that it might be even more stressful. So what should we start thinking about now in order to mentally prepare for a different experience this holiday season? Doreen, would you like to start us out on that one?
Sure. So one of the things we've been talking a lot about is this idea of kind of taking stock of where you are at this point in time as the holidays start. So for all of us, this time period has gone on for probably longer than we initially anticipated when it began. Many of us have experienced loss of some form, and many of us have lost people to COVID and other illnesses during this time. So it's kind of coming into it is kind of doing a bit of a self-assessment or a self-check-in about what are some things that are going to be uniquely difficult this holiday? What are some things that are actually going to be positive about the changes that we're facing? For many people that travel during the holidays, there may be some relief that this is a year they won't be on the road or won't be traveling. But at the same time, like you're saying, I think taking assessment of what's valuable to us about the holiday season, and then seeing how we might create things that meet that need. So for many of us, if you ask folks like what is the thing that feels valuable to you about the holidays, for many of us it's that sense of being around the people we love. And, this year, many of us are going to have to find different ways to do that. Probably several of you have heard Zoom just opened up their platform with no time limits for free on Thanksgiving. And it's forcing us to think about different ways we might connect. The last thing I'll just say about this is that I think it's a helpful perspective to go into this separating what's out of your control from what's in your control. because what we know is that neither perspective, on the extreme ends of that, are helpful to us. So if you think none of this is in your control, that leaves you with a sense of helplessness. And if you think you can control all of this, you're probably wrong about that too. So finding kind of the things you can control in the midst of all of this. So I may not be able to control whether I see my family during the holidays, but I can control whether I stay connected to them. I may not be able to manage kind of whether I get sick or not, but I can manage some things around my own safety and take some proactive steps around that in my day-to-day life. It's really about focusing on the things that we can do, and really putting our energies there this holiday season, that I think will be most helpful to all of us.
Doreen, that's excellent advice. And it's for some of us that may be refresher information, but oh my goodness, what a great way to do that, so that we can remember to focus on the things we can control and really look at the ways that we can make positive impacts throughout this holiday season. Debbie or Andy, do either of you have something you'd like to add?
I do. Thank you, Pam. I just want to say that it is really hard, and that whether we do it by Zoom or we do it in person, it's okay to acknowledge that this is an unusual year. This is a difficult year. Thanking people for their understanding. If family needs to be far away, say, we're sorry you're far away. We're glad you are, because we love you and we want you to be safe and be with us next year. There's also another piece that, folks who are a little more mature, like me, have lived through some really hard times. I remember the upheaval of the 60s. Now, I was a small child, a young girl, but nonetheless, it was really difficult times. And people who have lived through very difficult times, or the grandparents who have lived through, and by the way, I'm a grandma these days, who have lived through periods of war, like how difficult and the political upheaval was during the Vietnam War, and so we have some more tools in our toolbox to know it will get better. It's very, very hard right now, but it will get better. And so when we talk to the young folks who are struggling, and they are showing they're struggling more because they haven't been through it. It's their kind of first time around with something this hard, and it's really hard. That we have to be helpful. And when we can talk about that, we want to be sure to never use language that might, be traumatizing in some way, like, oh, get over it, oh, kind of thing. So we really have to listen. We have to acknowledge that it's difficult and share with them that we love them.
Oh, thank you, Debbie. So, Andy, anything to add?
I think they said it very well. Doreen, just kind of reiterating, most of my clients, we end up having that discussion about what is in your control, what is out of your control, and really breaking it down to help them focus on areas that are in the control. And I can see the anxiety come down. They come up with an anxiety level like this at the beginning of the session. And then when I begin to help them process the thoughts and focus on those areas, you can see it come down. And they give you that sign of, okay, a deep breath and a sigh, and they can feel like they can go back at it. And then I just want to add too, just in conversations with kiddos, especially during this time, like, we have to remind ourselves as adults that we have this awesome thing called executive functioning skill, that we can process and better understand some of these challenges and weigh things, but our kiddos struggle with that. They don't have that well-formed executive functioning yet. And so we have to kind of make sure that we're talking to them in ways that they understand. I mean, not avoiding those difficult conversations too, because kiddos are much more, they're obvious and they're focused, and they see these things, they see our interactions. When we're worried and we're scared and we're snippy, they kind of get affected by that too. So just, if you're working with kiddos, if you're working with peoples who struggle with some cognitive capacity, do be open with them, help them try to understand what's going on, help them acknowledge that it's okay to be afraid. This is kind of a not norm time, and normalizing it and validation goes a long way. That acceptance, like what you said, Debbie, is we are all in this together. We may experiencing it differently, but we're in it together. I hear you, I see you, I am with you, and letting all people know that we're here, and just to let another work together to grow through this moment.
Fantastic. Well, our next question, actually, we kind of rolled it in with this one. So I'm going to address it briefly, and then we're going to move on. You know, we've talked about the fact tradition is so very important during the holiday season, and how do we handle doing things that might not include our traditions this year, or might be totally different. And I think that you three of you really addressed those. So we're going to move forward into our next question. So, you know, question number 4 is really one of these that's near and dear to me, because I recently lost a friend to suicide, and it really became, it was really one of these moments when it was like, what could I have done? So the Mental Health America report, as Debbie referenced earlier, and Celestia, if you could move us forward, please. The Mental Health America report, you know, is showing that more people are reporting frequent thoughts of suicide and self-harm. And, you know, Debbie referenced earlier that they've had 1.5 million screens this year alone. And since the pandemic began in March 2020, over 178,000 people have reported having frequent suicidal ideations, and 37% of these people have reported having these thoughts more than half or nearly every day in September. And, you know, those numbers are pretty staggering. So I want us to take some time to discuss, you know, what if I'm the person having those suicidal thoughts? What do I do?
That's a great question, Pam. And one of the things about suicidal thoughts does not mean they will necessarily translate into suicidal actions. So that's something we have to remember as well. That said, what must be understood, and I know Doreen can elaborate more about this, is that suicide is an impulsive act. So maybe you're having those thoughts, and maybe you're having those thoughts every single day, but the intention to act upon it and actually take action comes upon a person very quickly, and generally they will act on that within 5 to 10 minutes. And so we need to make sure that we talk about it as we go along, that we make sure that they do not have access to the most lethal means, and talking about it is something that can help a person not act upon it. We need to be able to ask, how are you feeling? Are you feeling like you might want to hurt yourself or end your life? That doesn't plant the idea in somebody's head. If the idea is there, the idea is there. And people who are in that position appreciate when we recognize that, when we acknowledge it, when we put it out in the open. At Mental Health America, our founder over 100 years ago, Clifford Beers, his most famous line is, "I must fight in the open." So putting things in the open can really help diffuse a situation. But if someone has reached that point of crisis where they really may be ready to act, there are some wonderful national resources. There's the crisis text line. And the crisis text line is really easy to reach. By typing the word home to 741-741, you will immediately begin texting with someone who is trained in discussing and helping you work through your immediate crisis. The same thing is true for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which we at Mental Health America are very proud to say is home-based at our affiliate in New York City, Vibrant Behavioral Health. And their number, it's a big one, and I'll talk more in a second how that's going to change. It's 800-273-TALK, or 8255. So that's 800-273-8255. And this past year, there has been a tremendous coming together of national mental health organizations and bipartisan support in the Congress, both on the House and in the Senate, and recently signed by the President, is a bill that will, within 2 years, make that crisis text number a whole lot easier to remember. It will become 988. Now, that's not going to happen yet, but it's in process, and we're looking forward to that, and we're very, very excited about it. But some of the things that friends and family can do in the interim, as I said, is talk about it. The other thing that people can do, they can say, how are you storing your firearms in your home? And if folks don't have firearms in their home, great, they're going to tell you. If they do, it's going to make them think about how they're storing them. And if in fact they're feeling like they might be wanting to act upon their thoughts, friends, depending on the state that you're in, can say, can I hold your firearms for you? Can I help you lock them up? Can I help you secure them? Can I help you take them to the shop, which oftentimes will store them for you? So there are ways to mitigate risk and to make sure that if in fact the will to act could come upon people, the means are reduced. And with respect to firearms, it's a great idea all the time to make sure that they're secured safely within the home, because suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people. And if they complete suicide, it is likely that they have in fact used a firearm and it belonged to someone in their home or maybe their grandparents' home. So again, how do we mitigate it? We make sure that we take safety precautions, just like we put child latches on under the sink to make sure that people who shouldn't be accessing, what might be chemicals that could hurt them or product could hurt them, that they don't have easy access to it. So those are some of the simple things, and there are things that are harder as well.
Doreen, I want to turn to you because your expertise in being at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, I know that you can address these questions about, is there anyone I can call or text if I need to talk? And, what are some things we can look for? And also, too, for those of us that are friends and family, what can we do when we're concerned about someone?
That's great. And I just want to echo everything that Debbie said. I think she did a really good job of kind of framing, why we need to ask directly when we're worried about someone and to not be afraid, particularly about that, and also help them keep their environment safe. One thing we know about suicide is that it's very complex. It is biological in some ways. Our environments influence suicide as an outcome. Our own histories do. And at its core, it's a health issue. So what I like to tell folks is that if you're having thoughts of suicide, I would tune into that as a health indicator for yourself. So just like, if your pulse rate was up or you felt your heart beating in a way that felt unusual, you would tune into that and say, what's going on that this is happening? I think suicidal thoughts are very similar. Often they're an indicator that our mental health may be struggling, or we may be under inordinate stress, or it may be that we're finding that those thoughts are helping us somehow cope with immediate things going on. This idea of, if I'm not here anymore, I won't have to worry about this thing in front of me. But to use them as a health indicator, and the hardest time to address something that's a health indicator is when you're in the middle of it. So like what I tell folks, the time to prevent a heart attack is not as you're having one, right? At that point, you want to reach out for immediate help and get support. The best time to prevent suicide is when you start to notice that things are changing with your mental health. And thoughts of suicide are often one indicator that we may be feeling more depressed or stressed. And that's the time to reach out, to not wait. And similarly, if you're concerned about someone, we know that when people are struggling with suicide, there are often things that we think of as warning signs, or things that kind of cue us in that maybe someone we love is struggling. Those things tend to fall in 3 buckets. I think of them as talk, behavior, and mood. And what you're really looking for is something that feels like a change or unusual about the person you care about that could be indicating they're struggling with their mental health. So they may talk in a way that they're not really thinking about the future. They may even mention that things would be better off if they weren't here, or they feel like a burden to other people. They may say things like, I wish I were dead, or I wish I could end my life. Listening for those things and then really following up and asking and say, I want to hear what's going on with you. I take this very seriously. Certainly behaviors change. Debbie mentioned that someone might start to look for ways of harming themselves, or they may start to isolate further, stop doing things they enjoy, use substances in a way that's not typical for them, or an increase. You know, we look for these changes in behavior too. And then finally, changes in mood. You know, someone who, you know, seemed to be coping okay, but now it seems much more sad or much more anxious, much angrier than they've been in some time. These are things we want to pay attention to. And when we notice something that doesn't seem quite usual for someone, that we, as Debbie said, not be afraid to ask directly, and not be afraid to ask if they're having thoughts of suicide. One other thing I'll add is I often get asked, well, do you just like bring it up? And it's like, well, yes, but you can also kind of just comment on what you're noticing and say, you know, when people sometimes feel overwhelmed or isolated or sad the way you're talking about, sometimes they also have thoughts of wanting to end their life. And I'm wondering if you've ever had those kind of thoughts, or if you're having them now. And then listening and connecting the person to help. And Debbie gave some great resources that exist to help connect people to what they need.
So, well, Debbie and Doreen, I want to thank you for the excellent information. And all of those resources have been put in the chat area, and they will also be they will also be available in the resources that you can access after the webinar. So I just want to encourage you really to look at that. So let's do a follow-up here, because, you know, sometimes those of us that have psychiatric disabilities, or we're experiencing mental health issues, we're kind of reluctant, and I can raise my hand on that, to share about these things because of the stigma and just the perception that we might be weak. And so during the holidays, I know that in the past, I've been even more apt to hide things, because, you know, we're expected to be happy and have a smile on our face. And so how can we share with others so we can get the support we need? What do we need to do? So, Andy, I'm going to start with you this time.
So how can we share with others? Well, since, you know, there is stigma in the feel that it is a week, or you shouldn't be unhappy in a time when there's joy, you know, I think recognize that if you feel like you're putting on a face or a mask, recognize, like, okay, what's making it difficult for me to be open and honest about how I'm really feeling. And of course, sometimes it's like, well, Andy, my family, like, I've had several men, which is very interesting in mental health treatment. You don't really see a lot of men come because of that stigma, but I do have men that have come to me. It's like, if I let my dad know I'm not doing well, he's going to think I'm a weak person. And so, well, maybe dad's not the best person to talk to, right? Maybe it's another person that you can find who's your safety net, right? So if you've got a person in your network of people who you can be open and honest with, you can let that guard down and talk openly about how you're thinking, how you're feeling. And I'd guarantee, you know, is like when you have that connection, it gives you that person to connect with. If you don't have one of those people, there's this awesome thing that's called telehealth that actually keeps your privacy, your confidentiality very secure. I have people who go to their car during their lunch hour and talk to me through their phone or video conference. It's safe, it's secure. They're not having to drive to my building. They're not have to take off work and bring a written excuse for where they've been. So there's ways to reach out to people that you can have a safe person to talk to and be open about your thoughts and feelings. And I encourage you to do that, because there's this thing that we have as avoidance as humans. We often avoid thinking and feeling the things that we don't want to think and feel about because it doesn't make us feel good. But the unfortunate thing about avoidance is the more we avoid, the bigger it gets. And then before you know it, it is a massive mountain on your back or in your mind and in your heart. And so if you're aware of what you're avoiding, and if you seek out those places that are safe for you to whittle away, it becomes less of a bigger problem. And so I encourage you to find, who are your safe people? Who can you go to? Who can you talk to? Who can you be open and honest about, that's going to accept, that's going to support, that's going to nurture you during those times?
Andy, thank you so much for that advice, because I think that is an area where many people do struggle. And, and having personal experience with that, I can, I know it's there, it's real. And you're right. Being able to whittle things down and make them more manageable, and finding that safe person or persons in your life that you can talk to makes a huge difference. So, well, let's also, talk. Just let me follow up here. We do have telehealth options right now, and I do just want to reemphasize the need. If you need to talk to someone, make sure you look up those warm lines, that crisis text line. Make sure there are places you can reach out to, and I want to encourage you to do that, because it makes all the difference when you can talk with somebody of a like mind that may have been where you are, because many of these places are staffed by people who have been there, done that, and may still be doing that at some level. They just may be at a different place than you are right now. So let's move on to our next question, because we've talked a little bit about this, about how can friends, family, and colleagues provide the support to the people in our lives that are dealing with issues related to mental health. I want to expand this question a little bit, because, when we are face-to-face with people and in the same room or the office, we can kind of pick up on things, but picking up on those cues are a little more difficult when your interaction is via social media or video calls. What tips do you have for folks? Because I'll be honest, with my friend who recently died by suicide, there was something in the back of my mind with one of his posts, and I'll be honest with you, I was so overwhelmed with what was going in my life that I didn't even think to address it. And then 3 weeks later, I'm the one of the ones sitting there crying. So what do we do? How can we address those cues?
Pam, I want to jump in on this, and I want to also include answer to the last question. As the cliche goes, hindsight is 20/20. So you said what you didn't see in his post, and then there you are a few weeks later crying. And this is one of the really difficult things. I'm sure Doreen will have more to say about this, for families who have lost someone to suicide and friends who have been lost to suicide. People are always saying, what could I have done? And they internalize that. And let me assure folks, it is not what they could. Yes, there are many things they can do leading up to if they happen to see, or ways that they can help, or mitigation, all those things we talked about, but it's not their fault. And so it's really important that people understand that, and that they don't, hit themselves over the head with should haves. I have no doubt that you are a good friend all the time, and that's what matters, and that you love that person, and that's what matters. And as at Mental Health America, we just about everybody who works there, it's personal. And let me tell you, when we go out in the world and we tell our own stories and we talk about how it's personal, people share with us how it's personal for them too. And that's one of the ways that we can overcome some of the difficulties of facing family members and so forth. Because once we start talking about it, it's going to be hard, and it might be a little hard at first, but you'll find that other members, especially extended family, are willing to tell their stories and be sympathetic and be helpful as well. And when we talk about stigma, really what that word means is shame. It's whether somebody's shaming you or you yourself have internalized that shame. And so it's hard, but Pam, you mentioned one of the best resources we have, and that's especially trained people who've been there and done that. We call them peer specialists, certified peer specialists. And many of our MHA affiliates all across the country have peer specialists on staff. They have warm lines. Those that have had warm lines, they're seeing an explosion in numbers since the pandemic. And those that haven't had warm lines, many of them are establishing them so that they can reach people virtually. So as you said, it's so important to talk about it. And that helps us dispel that shame and not be afraid to put things out and allow other people to help to make us feel shame.
Pam, I would love to add some to that. And I think what Debbie said is so important. And Pam, I also want to share condolences for the loss of your friend. You know, I think what's most important is one, that we think of suicide as an outcome as really the health issue that it is. And just like we, when we grieve losing people to other illnesses, other health issues, you know, we need support. We do with suicide as well, but we often don't get the same support because people don't talk about it the same way. And I think, Debbie, that was really your point, that it's the more we talk about it, the more we do to address stigma around mental health and certainly around suicide. Two things I'll say really quick, and this is more by way of resources. We at AFSP developed a series of guides, and there's some video clips that actually I'm the person on the video. It's on our website at afsp.org/real convo, for real conversation. Because what we were hearing, similar to this question, is that it was hard for family and friends to know how to start that conversation with someone about their mental health. And similarly, for the people struggling, it was hard to kind of bring it up. And this goes back to your last question around, if you're the person struggling, you know, often we think we're wearing a neon sign of our struggle. And I can tell you, people are so focused in their own lives that they often don't notice the things we think are very apparent. I've had people that I've worked with tell me, I say, well, did you try to talk to anybody or reach out when you were struggling? And they'll say, yeah, I asked my sister if she was busy, and she said she had a ton of stuff to do, and so I didn't take it any further. And so, you know, really, I think what we have to do is really treat these conversations like the important conversations they are, to start them with, hey, I really want to talk to you about something important to me, and when is a good time to do that? So that we have people's full attention when we're ready to share about our mental health. I think if we treat them as just conversations that are super casual, people may miss the importance of this. And likewise, really quickly, I would just add that if you are worried about someone, you know, even if in the time we're talking here, if you think, gee, I wonder if this person, if someone occurs to you, chances are pretty good there's something to be concerned about. We tend to kind of downplay our gut feelings about that. And, you know, Pam, I appreciate you sharing the vulnerability around that, because I think it is important that we don't decide our own gut about things. Even if we can't quite put our finger on what's wrong, if we feel something's not quite right, we should reach out and just ask. Worst that happens is we're going to be wrong, and the person's just going to know we care about them. But I appreciate you sharing that, because I think many of us look back, and I too have been impacted by suicide, look back and think, what could we have done differently, or what did I miss? But it's very hard, like Debbie said, to know in the moment, which is why we have to just tune into our gut instinct if something doesn't seem quite right.
Debbie and Doreen, thank you so much for what you've shared at this point. Andy, I would like to get your feedback on this issue from your perspective of working with individuals on a day in, day out basis. And, you know, you specifically mentioned some of the work you do with young people. So I anticipate that we may, based on some of our earlier conversation, we may be seeing issues with young people, and they are the ones on various social media and maybe have less of a face-to-face connection, even on a regular basis, much less in a pandemic situation. So what are your thoughts?
The young people that I see struggling the most are they, like my preteen teenagers, you know, and I also have nieces that are in the kindergarten, first grade, and it's hard on them too. They're kind of struggling with not being able to play with their friends as much, but the ones with the the really evolved social connection, and all of a sudden they can't do it anymore. In that age group, preteen, teenagers, social connection and peer involvement is such a part of their development. And they're all over the place, honestly, in my sessions with their depression and anxiety, and then there's an uptick, unfortunately, in substance misuse, those kind of things. And then in terms of suicide, they're also at risk because of impulsivity, so if they feel like there's no hope, and this is the way it's always going to be, and then all of a sudden you have social media, lack of connection, maybe there's some bullying, cyber stuff that's going on, and their capacity to cope is already overwhelmed, and mom and dad are freaked out about things, and they're not really present with me, and I'm in my room isolating. Well, my thoughts are going to go toward, I don't want to be here anymore. I do have a lot of kiddos that say, I don't want to wake up tomorrow morning, and it saddens me, kind of breaks my heart for them, but I sit there, I talk to them about it, and I'm there for them. I'm trying to be attuned, but it's a struggle. And again, with that age group, where some as adults, I think I forget, was it Deb, you mentioned, like you've got those life experiences and we've kind of been through challenging times and we've figured out how to kind of cope. But that age group with preteens and teens, some of them just this is their first time. They have never been through such a pandemic or the times, where this has affected their lives. And they honestly don't have that cognitive capacity yet to know all the answers of how to deal with it. And so they're left to the basic brain of survival and, fight, flight, or freeze, or try to find a different way. And so it's confusing. And so, so we do provide support. We work with them. We give them the hotlines. Like I've got a lot of teens whose sleeping patterns are off. And so they may be the ones that reach out to those numbers at 3:00 in the morning, because they're not going to go wake up mom and dad, maybe their best friend's not online either. So those numbers that they can call at night are so important. On the flip side, the ones that I have seen more significant effect recently is I've got my adults, my 25 to 35 range age adults are repeatedly struggling with suicide right now. And that's hard, but I'm providing the services, the support, the plan with them to help them get the support needed. So it's hard across the board for all those ages right now.
Well, let me ask the follow-up question, and any of the three of you feel free to jump in on this. Do you think social media has helped or hurt our mental health at this point? And what are your suggestions? Because, let's face it, our whole lives tend to be on social media and we're being bombarded 24/7. So what are your thoughts on that?
Cam, I want to jump in and say it's a double-edged sword. And start by saying, social media has allowed people to see that struggling, other people are struggling too. They're not alone. Celebrities are on social media talking about their own mental health struggles. That's really helpful. That's terrific. However, we know that social media has also provided new ways for kids to feel less than. Yes. When they look at what their friends have and they look at what they're doing and everybody looks like they're having fun. It's, wanting to keep up with the Joneses on steroids. Everybody wants the fancy clothes, the shoes, they look to be smiling. And it's also a tool for bullying, and it amplifies it in ways we've never seen before. So there's the good and the bad.
I would agree with that I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, as Debbie said, that while there's some positive things, there's also some things that it can be really challenging. And I think less important about looking at social media as a whole. It's more looking at how am I using social media? What is it disrupting? If it's disrupting things in my life, what's getting left out because I'm doing it? So a lot of times people are very active on social media, but they're not really reaching out to people in real life. or if you're a teen and it's disrupting your sleep because you're on all the time, that's another thing. So, I think this is a good reminder, Pam, for all of us that use social media, not just kids, but all of us, to really do a bit of a self-assessment. Like, what is getting edged out of my life because I'm doing this, and where is it benefiting me in terms of my mental health? And when that balance feels off, that we take some deliberate steps to either limit our use or take breaks from it or do things that we know will help us, rather than just kind of stay on the treadmill of the usual thing we do. It's a good opportunity to make a change that is within our control.
Yeah, I think the social media part, like we've seen an uptick in the use, obviously because of lack of social interaction. And so it is a great tool, as well as texting and FaceTime videos, to connect with other people, if that was what it was all about. That social media, like the Facebook accounts, the Instagram, and whatever other platform people are using, is the connection is there, but it's also the fear of missing out, the fear, that leads our mind to comparison, like to keep up with the Joneses. So I think from a clinician standpoint, I don't know, I see a lot of people who have increased anxiety, increased depression because of social media. And if you look at what we are, or even media use at all, like what's on the news, what we're reading in the newspapers, what we're seeing advertised, and as users, again, as adults, we also need to be aware with social media elements and platforms. There is an algorithm out there that is used to put things on our timeline to make us focus on things. So if you had a like on a specific meme or political affiliated thing, you're going to get a lot more of that. Okay. Same thing with mental health. You're going to get a lot more of that. So just be aware that if you're being sucked in, metaphorically, into hours of reading things that are evoking anxiety and making you mad at the world and mad at what's going on, that's not good for your mind. It's not good for your soul. And it is, okay, maybe I need to take a break from this. I'm going to go paint. I'm going to go play outside. I'm going to go eat something. I'm going to go hug on my kids if you've got kids. I'm going to go call a friend. So it is that awareness is key. The preteens and teenage population, they are enamored. They have umpteen million, I know that's a lot of alliteration there, but they have a lot of accounts, and there's so much in that, and they're missing some things. But just awareness that what we view, what we hear, what we read does have a direct impact on how we feel, how we think about the world around us. And right now, if you just look at Facebook media, the world is an unsafe place. People are hateful. Doesn't feel good to do these things. And that's not true. That is not true. That is a negative thought. There are some things that are unsafe, but not the entire world, not everybody. And so don't get swept up in those negative generalizations, and just take time away. Take try fasting from social media for an hour. What's that like?
Yeah, no, actually, I was just thinking as all of you were talking, because earlier this year I did 40 days without social media, and it was one of the best things I've ever done for myself. And I was just sitting here thinking, I think I need to do this again. I had forgotten how good that was. So now I do have a colleague that I won't call out by name, but this colleague says, thank goodness for videos on Instagram of pit bulls, because this person loves pit bulls, and that's the social media that this person gravitates to. So
I just want to say one thing, Andy. I love the term social media fasting. I'm going to borrow it and disseminate it and use it. I think that's a great term. And I know that in this difficult time, we all can really get sucked into it. Doing the job that I do and paying attention to advocacy and policy, I'm always looking at all of the news sites. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, and that gets my anxiety up, and I have to remember, put the telephone. Yeah. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Exactly. So, well, let's look at one other demographic that I think we've touched on briefly, but as we, as we know, our older adult population has been impacted by this pandemic possibly the most. Those who are in congregate settings, such as nursing homes or assisted living centers, may not have been able to see anyone except for the staff for months on end, or only be able to see their family via video. And then we also have situations where people have been confined to their homes because they've got compromised immune systems, or they're in a very high-risk category. So do you have any specific tips for older adults, their family members, and caregivers, especially as we do go into the holidays where we may or may not be able to see one another?
Yeah, I can start just to say that, certainly this year is going to be challenging for all of us in terms of the holidays, but it'll be particularly challenging for those that aren't plugged into technology, are very isolated. And that does describe many of our older adults that may be living in assisted living settings, or really having being in situations where having visitors or having people see them is going to be more difficult because of the pandemic. I think this is an opportunity for all of us to really be creative. And I say that knowing that creativity doesn't always go well when we're stressed. It's harder to access these things. But if you just Google supporting older adults during a pandemic, you will find so many people are writing about this or putting ideas out there. And I'll just share something anecdotally. So one of the nice things about Zoom and about being connected in this way is that we have access to things that were not, where geography or transport might have been a bigger issue before. It's not if we're plugged in. So for the older adults that aren't plugged in, any way we can kind of help them get access to some of these things. I'm part of a mindfulness group that meets every week. Most of the group is older adults, but we meet for an hour a week, and it's a real time of connection. And for many of them, it's the 1 hour during the week where they know they're in the company of people who support them. So it forces us to get creative, but I think if you know an older adult, to really think about, how can I help this person stay connected? And it's going to force us to do some creative thinking, but there are solutions out there, and it's worth asking others and doing searches and really taking a proactive stance on finding ideas of what we can do.
Doreen, I find it interesting that you were talking about, some of the creativity. My home would be considered non-traditional at this point. We have my husband and myself, and then my sister and my mother, and 4 dogs. So, it's in pre-pandemic with all of us, the three younger adults working and being gone all the time. We never saw one another. We were in the same house, but we never saw one another. And so one of the ways that we've come along, and some of the creative things we've done, and it sounds silly to say creative, but we actually do dinner together or supper together every night. And then we watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. I mean, that has become our time together and that's allowed us to support each other. So yes, we're in the same home, but there may be other ways you can do that. And I've got friends who are connecting and with folks via various media platforms and playing charades and things like that, things that we may have forgotten about, that we might need to rethink and think about how we can do them in another way.
I would just add quickly too that there is something like a good old-fashioned written note that you leave in your neighbor's mailbox, or dropping off a meal on their doorstep. There are things we can do while we're socially distancing right now that will still help people know we care about them, we're concerned, and we want to stay connected.
Definitely.
It's such an important topic right now, Pam. November is National Caregivers Month. And there's a lot of amazing resources. Mental Health America just put out a report just this week, and it's available on our website on caregiving. And caregivers take care of folks who aren't just older adult. They take care of folks with psychiatric needs. They take care of younger people. They find they're multi-generational folks who need to take care of themselves, take care of each other in the ways you've mentioned. So there's a lot of support that we can give and a lot of good resources. And I love Doreen's creativity. As I was thinking about how do we reach out to people who are isolated that we normally would be being with in person and doing a lot of caregiving, it's those putting the cards and letters in the mailbox. Older folks especially love to get them. Those old-fashioned ways when we used to send real letters by snail mail and things like that. So that there's a lot of great information. And tomorrow, Mental Health America is actually hosting a Facebook Live. I'll be moderating that panel. Hard job, and you're doing a great job. I know how hard it is to moderate. And so again, that's something you can see on our website. It'll be on Facebook Live tomorrow. And I'm so, I have to actually look at my calendar to see what time it is. Because if I don't get those 15-minute reminders, it's like, where am I supposed to be now?
Understood. Understood. So, all right, Andy, so I know that you've worked with the older adult population. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's all about connection in human connection. And I think kind of to copy what's already been said or echo what's been said, just finding some creative ways to do that. If it's phone calls, if it's letters, I have one of my clients is working with her adult daughter and writing a story together. So they will write portions and they come back and share what they're doing. I still, prior to, I guess this past week, I was having some face-to-face, but masked, safely distanced interaction with my older individuals. And I think even in that moment, for the hour that we're together, it was connection. It was proximity. It was someone's listening to me. I mean, so humans are not meant to be alone all the time. And so we just have to figure out a different way to do it. And while we were talking about like, well, can we go and sing songs to them from a distance? Can you stand outside their room and sing songs? I don't know, just getting creative. I love the letter idea. And that might be something that's cool. And or just if you're in an environment with a person who's not technical savvy, help create a system where it's easy for them to put, view the video, or at least hear someone. We have so much at our fingertips that can help enhance this connection. And just being there, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about all my older individuals, like loving on them from a distance. How do you do that in a safe way? How do you help them know that you still care? And it's, I don't know, just that's kind of what I'm exploring too with that population.
Well, the overarching theme I keep hearing is that we've got to be creative and we've got to make it happen, no matter what the situation might be this year. But the good thing about it is that it's, not only this year, but as we continue to move forward. So, well, ladies, as before we get into questions from our audience, is there any additional advice that you can share with our participants regarding staying mentally healthy during the holiday season?
Yeah, I think,
go ahead. Sure. I'm sorry, Andy, go ahead.
No, Miss Debbie, go ahead. You sure?
I just wanted to say that, it may be cliche, but let's count our blessings. Next week is Thanksgiving. Let's think about, even if we're far from folks, how we're thankful for them. Let's think about as the end of the year holidays approach, again, to have that positivity. Even though in much of the country it's very cold, get outside, enjoy nature. I'm very fortunate that I live in the mountains in Colorado, and I look outside every day and I just think about how beautiful it is. But it's beautiful all over the country, and I've lived in lots of places. So getting outside, bundle up, it's okay. Go for a socially distanced walk or just enjoy the change of seasons. And don't forget that our furry friends are a great comfort to us and a joy as well.
Thank you, Debbie. Andy?
So one things that I encourage myself and my clients is watch how you talk to yourself. Watch the thoughts that you have about yourself. If you find yourself getting into the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, You're going to have these feelings of sadness, guilt, self-blame. And then tell yourself it's okay to be not okay. Okay. It's okay to feel the way you feel right now in this moment. If you're anxious, if you're sad, if you're mad, if you're happy, you know, it is okay. You are living this moment right now. Celebrate the small stuff. If it's difficult to get out of bed, but you found a way to get out of bed, that is awesome. I don't care if you're still in your pajamas. I don't care if you haven't showered for 3 days. But if you got out of bed, that's an awesome celebration. All right? Celebrate the small stuff. If the world and the day seems monotonous, find little ways to kind of break that routine. What is something that you can learn new? Maybe you want to learn how to speak Klingon, you know, or Dothraki, or learn something. But engage your mind in things that it hasn't been able to do before. Creatively, you know, listen to some music, make some music, draw, paint, but go outside as well with nature. That sunshine, oh my goodness, it's so good for the spirit and the soul and your physical body. You know, so if you're able to get outside, even for like 10 or 15 minutes, it's a good thing. Or if you can sit beside a window where there's some sunlight, those are good things. But all in all, be present with yourself, be mindful. Take care of those basic needs. Are you eating? Are you eating and trying to eat as healthily as you can? Are you trying to get some good sleep? Are you able to get a little bit of movement and exercise? Are you taking care of your spiritual needs if you have that something that is part of you? Are you taking care of your connections with people? But take care of you. It is okay to feel the way you feel right now. It is okay.
Andy, you brought up some very great points, and someone posted in the chat a few other ideas. I'm going to throw in, Doreen, before we get to you. You know, picking up the phone and calling someone, you know, and just actually reaching out and talking to loved ones and friends, because it, helps people to feel good. And so these are some things that are easy to do. They just take a little bit of time. So excellent advice, Doreen.
Yeah, I think everything that's been said has been so great. And I would only thing I would add is we're in this for a longer stretch than any of us anticipated. And so we've already figured out this is a marathon, not a sprint. And that really taking things a day at a time, you don't have to decide for the rest of time how you're going to cope with this. Just focus on the moment. Small actions matter, like Andy said. So, when I can't do anything else, when I'm feeling really emotionally spent, and none of us have lived through this kind of time, and so there's no right or wrong. We're just going to do the best we can, but focus on the basics. Try and get some sleep, eat something that's not Oreos, maybe, drink some water, try and keep a sense of humor when you can. Set small goals. You don't have to write the great American novel while you're in the pandemic, but you might try something new. I baked a terrible batch of cookies about 2 weeks ago. I'm not a baker. I thought I'd try something from scratch. They were awful, and we had a good laugh about it as a family. Don't be afraid to do something small. The way I try and remember is I can do anything for 5 minutes. So when I feel like not doing anything, maybe I pick up the stuff around my house for 5 minutes, or I go for a 5-minute walk. And often that turns into a bit longer. And once I'm moving, I feel differently. But really small actions. And I think just realizing that our feelings may change. And if today doesn't feel like a day I can do much, tomorrow may be better.
Well, you've given us excellent advice, and these are all things that we really do need to remember. So now, before we get into our question and answer time with our participants, I do want to remind folks that there are all of these resources that have been mentioned will be available on the webinar page, where you guys may have received some of the initial information. So be sure to go look at that, and in a moment I'll put that into the chat area too. In the meantime, what I would like for you to do is, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A area, and we will go ahead and share these questions with Debbie, Andy, and Doreen, and we will get to as many of these as possible while we're here. So hold on just a moment. We're going to go ahead and start with questions that have already been posted, and So, and go ahead and get started there. Now, one of the questions that was posted is that studies show that babies who are born and do not get physical contact or hugs or touch develop a failure to thrive. I'm curious about the long-term and short-term effect on all of us with the lack of touch, hugs, contact, and especially those who live alone. And this particular person says, for me, I do have my dog for companionship, but again, that human touch is something I really, really struggle not having today. So any comments or responses for this person?
It's a really, first, I think we can all connect to that feeling of just not feeling the physical touch. I'm a hugger. This has been a very hard time for me not to be able to hug people the way that I would want to. You know, first, I think to acknowledge that that is what you're missing and to not kind of feel like that's not an okay feeling. I think, particularly if you're someone who really connects with people in that way, it can be really hard. You know, we've been encouraging folks to still stay connected, even though we can't physically connect, but also to do the things that kind of provide us a sense of like creature comforts. So, you know, it could be making sure you have a favorite blanket or, you know, wearing the softest clothing. You know, if you're somebody who's tactile by nature, you'd be surprised how those things, they don't replace human touch, but they can be a comfort when we're feeling kind of lonely or disconnected. You know, drink something warm, those kinds of things that soothe us physically can be a big help. But I think all of us agree with you. And, you know, one of the things I'm mindful of, you mentioned the study with the babies. When they looked at, I read something about when they were looked at kind of how people coped with large scale things. They looked at the earlier pandemic in the early 1900s, that was a normal piece of what people started to feel pandemic fatigue about, this kind of lack of touch, so only to say that this is a very normal feeling, and that as we know, people recovered from the earlier pandemic in the early 1900s and resumed contact, that this won't be forever for us. But to do the things in the interim that really help you have that sense of tactile comfort can be helpful.
Doreen, those are some excellent suggestions, and ones that you know, I have some of the ones I've tried that have worked. So for some people, the weighted blankets are another option. They just provide that snug comfort that is sometimes just needed. So yes, I understand that. So Andy, this next question was specifically directed to you, but others, Doreen and Debbie, feel free to jump in if after Andy responds. It says, Andy, you mentioned working on what's in our control. This is something I personally struggle with, as I know struggle with being a yes or a fix-it person. So can you share ways that you work on this in your profession on how to work through it's okay and let go of what we can't control? You're on mute.
There we go. All right.
There you go.
Oh, that's a really good question. It's like, it's okay to let go of what we can't control. Okay. I think what has been helpful to myself and people I work with is it's recognizing, okay, here's a situation. All right. I'll give you an example. I had a client that came into my office or did a telehealth session, and she was really anxious about a recent utility bill that she received. Okay. And so she was like, I'm freaking out, you know, kind of beating herself up for not knowing. And so I began to kind of work with her, looking at the evidence of the situation, taking a step back. What was presented? How did you know it was going to be? You know, is there anything that was out of your control? You know, the electric company, you kind of put your trust in the electric company to let you know the appropriate amount. And when they stuck a larger bill, you're like, I don't understand why this is, you know, but now you've learned from what to do next time. So all in all is take a step back on that situation. You know, look at like, okay, I am doing the best I can with what I have to manage the situation. Do I need to reach out to someone to help this? Is this anything that I can do? You know, Are you able to control another person's reactions or response? You know, you can't control what they do, what they think. You can control how you share your thoughts and feelings, but once you've put it out there, it really is on that person to do with what they do. When you get to that point of recognizing what is in and out of your control, you begin to recognize, I did the best I could with the situation with what I had. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to put it back on the shelf for a minute. Now the challenge is going to be, your mind is going to want to go back constantly. I could do this differently. You're going to have to be like, okay, I'm going to put it back. You've heard the phrase of letting a balloon go. Like, I am going to try to physically let this balloon rise away. Now we keep holding on to that string. So there is this, I have to honestly open up my hands and let it go. It's easier said than done. It's not like you just say it happens, but it is how you think about it. Where are you spending your energy? Are you trying to control a situation that literally is out of your control? I can wish it wasn't raining, but the weather's out of my control. But what I can control is I can go outside in my rain boots, with my umbrella. I can even go outside and walk in the rain if I want to. When I focus on what is in my control and managing that situation, it honestly helps to decrease that anxiety. But the more energy and effort that I try to focus on areas that are out of my control, I become increasingly more anxious. So it's just this balance. It is recognizing what is in my control, what can I let go of, and giving myself permission to say, I have done the best to manage the situation in the best way that I have and I can do, and being okay with that.
Excellent, excellent. So now, folks, if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and we are going through those one by one. And I want to go ahead and get to one of our next questions here, and it is, how do you reach out to and I'm going to spell this so that I do not mispronounce it, BIPOC community via resources and offerings that are culturally sensitive to their needs?
Pam, that's a great question, and it's BIPOC is how we say it.
Thank you. I wanted to say it correctly.
People of color. That's what it stands for. And it's really important to think about, not that, and I'm going to speak as a white person, and I think it's really important because we don't have folks of color on this right now, to talk about, to recognize privilege, to just be aware of it, and that folks of color, people of color, and LGBTQI folks also are often discriminated in ways that people who don't fit into that, who don't identify as such, really experience discrimination. So what we need is something that I refer to as cultural humility. We don't know. Now, that doesn't mean we remain ignorant. That means that as we ask people how they're feeling, we really listen. That we really look at what is it that has given particularly white folks advantages, and how do we see our neighbors around us who are people of color who have been discriminated against. It's really come into focus in big ways this past year, and it's always been there. We just necessarily haven't had the focus on it. We haven't been looking at it in the same way. So sensitivity to that can really make a huge difference to showing that we support all of our friends, neighbors, countrymen, and so forth. It's really important to show that humility. My training as a social worker, and I'm sure everybody on this call also has this, where we had to take a course entitled Cultural Competency. And I hate that term. I mean, I just hate it, because who the heck is competent? I mean, I know I'm not. And so having that understanding that we're really not, but asking and being willing to listen is one of the best ways we can do. And in ways that we see discrimination happening, especially if it's white folks saying something that's really discriminatory, stand up to them and say something and call them out on it. That's something that we can do as part of actions we can take, as well as have humility to ask and listen how current events, how past events are affecting the rest of our communities.
Debbie, thank you so much. Because this is a very, very real issue, and is one that I personally have become even more aware of, and started having conversations with colleagues and friends, and trying to understand more of it. So, Doreen, so do you have something you'd like to add?
Well, I was just going to add a resource that at AFSP, like many organizations, during this time, we've really done kind of a deep look at how our programming was reaching BIPOC communities, our messaging, if it was culturally relevant. And so we've done a series of webinars, and they'll continue during 2021. Many of them are recorded on our website at afsp.org. And the series is Elevating Voices for Change, and they're panel discussions that feature members of the BIPOC community who are mental health professionals, researchers, others working in mental health, people with lived experience, and sharing their experiences, and really just using AFSP's platform to get their viewpoints, their work out. So I'd encourage you to just check out our website and listen to some of those, or watch some of those webinars with an eye of, what can I learn from this? Like Debbie said, I think it's so important that all of us just be open to learning, and a recognition that BIPOC communities have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So, you know, when there are opportunities to not only support those communities, but also elevate their needs, we should be advocates for doing that.
Thank you, Doreen. So, well, I want to get to a couple of more questions here. We've got about 8 minutes left. If any of you still have questions, please put them in the Q&A. If we are unable to get to your questions during today's sessions, if you have provided us with contact information, we will try to follow up with you. So, now, we have so another question here, and I think this is a very important question. The person says they're a college student, and they broke up with a girlfriend back in March, and thinks that part of it was due to communication struggles when they were physically apart. And they recently got back together, but now, going into the holidays and break time at school, he's very concerned. So, is there any advice on those communication struggles and addressing some of the other issues that may go with it?
I actually have a person that experienced something similar right at the beginning of the pandemic, and would like to share with you what this person utilized with their partner. Maybe it's kind of going with a plan when you're recognizing the difficulty, again, bringing it forth. It's going to be hard, but let's work on a plan together to have these levels of communication. So this person and his partner, they would spend time like, well, we're going to have a Zoom call from 7 to 8 at night. They had those planned times where they did have some face-to-face interaction, to just kind of maybe working with your partner to develop a way to continue to have those lines of communication open. I think where I've seen increased anxiety occur is when maybe, say, if you're up at 4 a.m. and your partner's not, and you try to reach out and that partner doesn't respond to the text or phone calls, and then that's when the thoughts come in, like, oh, maybe they don't like me or they're mad at me. And again, be awareness of those thoughts, but if you go in with a plan saying, well, maybe they're not available right now, but I know we agreed to get together at 7 o'clock for a Zoom session, so I'm looking forward to talking with them at 7, and kind of alleviate some of those anxieties. I don't know if that's helpful. Hopefully it is, but that's something that this person found helpful when the pandemic first started with the communication patterns.
Andy, thank you. That is excellent advice, because sometimes you just have to schedule those times and make it happen, and it really does make a difference. So I'm going to go do one more question, and then we are going to have to wrap up for the day. But so another question that's come in that I think is very important is, how can a person become a peer advocate?
That's a super important question, Pam. And so I spoke earlier about folks who are specially trained, who are certified peer specialists. And just about every state has a training for people who would like to work in some kind of capacity. So having a personal experience is really important. However, it's not enough. Having training is really important, but it's not enough. So a certified peer specialist has both that lived experience and that training in how to do important things like motivational interviewing and listening and all the important things that Andy does every day in her work as a therapist. So reaching out to the Department of Mental Health or Behavioral Health, whatever they call it, in their state place to start. You can reach out to Mental Health America as well. We have a national certification, and we also do some trainings in various parts of the country, but not all the time. Most of our affiliates do the training, and there are also other wonderful organizations like Recovery International that does trainings all over the country as well. So that's how you can get a job. And one of the things that we do at Mental Health America, and I do as Vice President of advocacy, is I work with legislators to make it be more recognized and work to get people paid a more livable wage. So those things are also important. Are there ways to volunteer? There are, but they're different. And organizations do have folks who, for example, if you have experienced some types of cancer or diabetes, there's people who talk to other people in their communities. They're community health workers, a little bit different than peer specialists, but I don't know if that person who was asking about mental health peers training, but it is available in almost all states, and that certification. And where it's not, we at Mental Health America can help you find some other ways.
Well, Debbie, thank you for that very comprehensive answer. And I think that, that's a very helpful, that helps a lot, will help a lot of people who, I mean, for those of us that do have lived experience that are looking to be able to help others. So, well, we are almost at the end of our time today. If we did not get to your question, please send an email to our project email at adasoutheast@law.syr.edu. So we would be more than happy to respond to your question or to share it with one of our speakers. And I Debbie and Andy and Doreen, I just cannot thank you enough for sharing the information that you've shared with our audience today, because it has been absolutely wonderful. And I do think that, that you've given us a lot of tips and resources that can help us get through the holidays. So while as we get ready to wrap up, hang with me for a minute, because you're going to want to know a little bit more about the certificate of completion and the post-test. Now, first of all, we do have a post-test for today's webinar, and that is how you will get a certificate of completion. You have to be registered, which if you're with us, you are, and then listen to all of the webinar, and your attendance will be verified, and then you've got to complete the post-test. Now, we're going to give you a bonus question that you need to know for the post-test, and Celestia's going to help us out with that. So Celestia, if you can take us to our special slide. So you will want to know that this lovely puppy dog is a Bernedoodle, I think I said that correctly, and his name is Everest. So consider this a gift to you for the post-test. Keep that in mind. It's very important. Now, after you submit the post-test and we verified your attendance, you'll get a link to print out your certificate of completion. And so it will be sent to the email address that you gave on file. Now, your feedback is very, very important to us. We read every piece of feedback that comes in, because we always want these webinars to be helpful to you and those whom you serve. And so please, we ask you to provide us with feedback when you get the survey, and to identify topics for future webinars. And as a reminder, the link to the post-test and the evaluation will be also sent out via email within 1 hour after the webinar ends. Now, the webinar and all of its materials and resources will be archived on our website. That will include a recording, a transcript, and the presentation itself. And so we encourage you to, use it and go back to it as you need it, and also share it with your friends and colleagues. And it will be at adasoutheast.org/webinars/archives.php. We thank you again for joining us today, and we do wish you the best of mental health and wonderful holidays as we go into Thanksgiving next week and our winter holidays in December. If you have any questions about the Americans with Disabilities Act, we encourage you to contact your regional ADA center at 1-800-949-4232. Or you may contact the Southeast ADA Center at 404-541-9001. And again, our email address is adasoutheast@law.syr.edu, or you may also email our dedicated webinar email at seada-webinars@law.syr.edu. All calls and emails are confidential, and we look forward to hearing from you, and good luck on your post-test. Take care.